Alright guys, time for another video, and today we're going to be talking about the Pope. Well, I guess not the current Pope, the former Pope Benedict. And my God, does this news story make me wish that he had actually just stuck down to his, statement that he was going to remain hidden from the world after leaving his popedom. That just didn't end up happening, and he ended up releasing this letter that was originally, I guess, posted in a German magazine for priests, but has now been posted in English by the Catholic news agencies, and top Vatican official has confirmed that the essay is authentic. And it is all about Pope Benedict specifically addressing and talking about the sex abuse crisis within the Catholic Church and his reasoning as to why he believed it happened. And my God, if you're a normal person, you're gonna be really upset about the reasoning. So I don't even think I really need to ease into this, but it's pretty obvious that the Catholic Church has a long-standing, disgusting history with child sexual abuse within the church from people in positions of power, specifically priests, bishops, cardinals, what have you. And then instead of allowing these people to be dealt with properly through law channels, they just get moved to different priesthoods and they just explain it away. If you haven't watched the movie Spotlight, I would strongly recommend doing so. It actually won the Academy Award. It's one of the ones that I actually agree with the fact that it won the Academy Award. It's a very well-made movie dealing specifically with the Boston Globe team that really first exposed the story of this happening and the extent to which it was happening in Boston. And since then, we've had stories that have come out in Philadelphia and a lot of other areas that show the extent of the rampant sexual abuse of children within the Catholic Church. And if you are part of a different religion, don't just think oof, thank God I'm a Baptist. Pretty much anywhere that you have situations where there's someone who is an adult who is in a position of power over children, you are going to find instances of sexual assault and abuse. It's a very sad reality, and unfortunately, church situations seem to allow it to happen more, particularly in the areas where there's really strong reliance and trust in religion, where people like priests, like pastors, are occasionally not just seen as a link to God, but basically seen as God. So, like I said, if you're not really familiar with the situation and some of the stuff that goes into it, I would strongly recommend watching the movie Spotlight. It's a really well-made movie, and it's really heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to talk about, and knowing that this is happening all over the world, and that some of these people who have committed these crimes have just been moved to priesthoods and areas where the laws might not come down on them as strictly or might not notice as much. Like some of these people get moved to places in South America and all sorts of crazy ass shit like that, where they have an even less ability to access children. So really disgusting. So he basically spoke out on that because obviously it's hot news constantly as to why this happens so much and how it's gone through, and how they always try to claim that the Vatican didn't necessarily know the extent of it, even though the Vatican's in charge of moving the priests around and stuff like that. And eventually they kind of had to admit guilt. And this letter kind of really goes into detail. It actually specifically talks about the fact that they didn't know how to deal with the situation when it was happening. And in the letter, he specifically reveals some of the behind-the-scenes struggles between the Vatican and American bishops in the handling of the crisis, and admits that the Vatican was initially overwhelmed in dealing with it. That's the issue. Why was that ever there? I hate these, and you see it a lot. You see it in any kind of abuse situation or abuse scandal involving universities or colleges, very much specifically in the United States. You see it a lot, where the university tries to deal with it in-house rather than handing it over to authorities. And you see it here. They don't deal with it. They don't actually deal with it. To deal with it would be to remove the problem and to at least fire them, at least remove them from the church, not move them to a different parish or a different location. That's not dealing with a problem. That's just moving the problem so it's somebody else's problem. That's just giving somebody who is a serial abuser a whole new crop of people to work through that don't know about the shit that they've done in the past. It's disgusting, it's vile, and the Vatican should 100% be held accountable for it. It's disgusting. But now we're going to talk about some of the reasons. So there's the reasons that former Pope Benedict thinks that this was happening, and it is for one just disgusting. It's trying to offer an explanation as to why sick people do sick things, when it's clearly something that didn't just crop up in this time. That's just when people first started talking about it. come on, but he asserts that the changes in traditional moral standards on sexuality, both in society and within the Catholic Church, laid the groundwork for the sex abuse crisis. Like, motherfucker, somebody who is going to abuse children when that's still a crime and it's vile and it's a gross violation of your power and a gross violation of that person's innocence, doesn't give a fuck about what like the societal goings on are. Some kind of like sexual revolution of the 60s is not going to suddenly make somebody who is going to be a child abuser be like, oh, I guess it's okay to be a child abuser now because it was still illegal. It was still looked down upon incredibly, and it was still disgusting at the time. So you're basically just trying to say like, it's not their fault. It's society's fault for just having a better understanding of their own lives and sexuality and being more open to people rather than sticking to like the very also unhealthy standards of the past. Ridiculous. He also said that pedophilia was diagnosed and then allowed and appropriate. Pedophilia being diagnosed didn't make it appropriate. It just put a name on a heinous act that had been happening for ages. In fact, giving it the name is what made it really not okay. You give it a name and you point out that it's horrible. How is that making it appropriate? Like, I realize this man is 92, but at some point, somebody needs to be like, he said, there were, not only in the United States of America, individual bishops who rejected the Catholic tradition as a whole and sought to bring about a new, modern Catholicity. You know, I think when some of them are talking about bringing like a bit more modern twist to Catholicism, it's just like, you know, being open and more accepting to things that you might not have been accepting to in the past. Not pedophilia, not... You know, we want to be a little bit more open so that there's more people who feel comfortable coming to the church. So we're going to start raping their children. Then he would go on to say, in various seminaries, homosexual cliques were established, which acted more or less openly and significantly changed the climate in the seminaries. Again, homosexuality and pedophilia are not the same thing. Are there male pedophiles who specifically go after like male children? Yep. Are there male pedophiles who specifically go after female children? Yep. Are there female pedophiles who specifically go after young boys? Yep. And are there female pedophiles who specifically go after young girls? Absolutely. There's also pedophiles who just go for it, like whatever child. Pedophilia is not a sexuality, so you can't equate it to another aspect of sexuality. If anything, you should look at the fact that Catholicism denies priests, bishops, and anything else any ounce of sexuality, and then they can't express it properly, and they're basically trained their entire life to believe that like any expression of their sexuality is a sin, and then they can't even do it within the legal lie of the church, which would be getting married and, you know, just, you know, having sex for procreation purposes. They're denied that. That creates a very unhealthy sexual environment for them, which also led to things like the rape of nuns, which also happens because, again, not all priests that end up committing sexual offenses commit them against children. A lot of the times they get committed against children because they see them as easy targets. You can find kids that don't have strong family lives that then look to the church for that support, and they take advantage of that support, and it's fucking disgusting. It's absolutely vile. But there's just so many stories of nuns being taken advantage of in these situations, which is also disgusting and just shows a systematic issue within the church that does not have to do with the world changing around you. It has to do with your own archaic laws. And it's just the fact that you've created an environment where people who have these kind of feelings are put in positions where they have power over children. I'm sure a lot of people feel these feelings and then try to turn to God to like fix their problems, and then it just ends up giving them access to the exact thing that they are at risk of doing. And in this situation, they are at risk of raping, sexually abusing, physically abusing, every kind of abuse you can imagine, these poor fucking children. And that's what ended up happening. Please, for the love of God, do not blame the fact that the world was becoming more liberal, which is exactly what he said. And he would go on to say that it's specifically people like liberal theologians who question the church's traditional norms on sexuality are partly to blame. No, it's not, because this is a rampant issue that was clearly going on before any of this kind of stuff happened. It just took years for it to get exposed, because who wants to admit that that happened to them? Who wants to put themselves or their families at risk when they get assaulted by a priest and then get told things like, don't tell your family, otherwise, you know, what are they going to think of you? You know, or you've been blessed. This is actually a blessing. Like, they can literally word it in so many different ways because they have such extreme power over the people that they're in. And this is a bad take. And then he ended it all off by saying that pedophilia reached such high proportions due to the absence of God. Fuck you. Holy fucking shit, you are disgusting. Like, you are literally putting the blame on everything other than the problem. Like, little tiny societal things like that don't turn people into pedophiles. And to suggest that makes you just absolutely fucking vile. And maybe there's a larger issue where they were pulling people into the church to try to like cure them of these thoughts, and that actually just gave them more access, because that's also screwed up. Like, it's one thing to want to try to offer somebody like counseling or help, but if somebody comes to you saying that they're trying to, you know, pray away their horrible thoughts of wanting to abuse children or sexually abuse children, and your answer is to, you know, put them into priesthood or into the seminary and in positions where they are around children a lot, that makes you part of the problem. And that's not how you solve the problem. And honestly, if I was him, I'd probably keep my mouth shut, because I'm pretty sure he was heavily involved in a lot of the cover-ups involved in this entire situation. So maybe it's time to shut up. Because again, he's trying to make it seem like this all suddenly started popping up in like the 60s. This has been going on since the inception of the Catholic Church. And to try to put the blame on society, fuck off. Anyways, that is gonna do it for today's video. I'm sure there's probably some videos on this that are a little bit less opinionated and maybe a little bit more like just kind of reading through everything he said, but like, there's no sympathy here. This drivel is not even worth like giving you the full details of, because it's basically just some guy who was probably heavily involved in covering up these scandals over the years, trying to put the blame on everything other than where the blame should be placed. Yeah, so thank you all so much for watching. Have a fantastic day, and we'll catch you all later.